Hello everyone and welcome to episode 9 of The Display Show. My name is Brian Berkeley and I'm your host for engaging discussions with key display industry leaders and influencers. Today's episode features Ajit Ninan, Vice President of Engineering at Dolby Labs and an early pioneer of everything from full array local dimming HDR to quantum dot displays to augmented and virtual reality. We talked about the origins of Dolby Vision. Did you know that it started as a 2,000 nit taillight simulator for automobiles? We got into melted LCD films, burning display demos, the critical potted palm metric, Ray Dolby's involvement, solving for directors' intent across a range of technologies and products, AR, VR, and more. Please don't forget to click subscribe and hit the bell to get notified of new episodes. Now, on to the show. Hi everybody, today's guest is Ajit Ninan. Ajit works at Dolby Laboratories where he's Vice President of Engineering. Among many activities, Ajit has been one of the key drivers of Dolby's transition from an audio-only company into the world of video. He's been instrumental in Dolby's development of high dynamic range imaging technologies, which includes HDR hardware, specifically the Pulsar 4000 nit monitor, which was one of the first HDR monitors ever, and importantly, the development of Dolby Vision from its inception with a small team to where it is today. Ajit built one of the first locally dimmed quantum dot TVs to enable delivery of HDR with wide color gamut. His educational background is in computer science and computer engineering. He authored the JPEG XT documents, which are also known as JPEG HDR, and he worked on network protocols such as 802.17. I hear he also has been doing some amazing work on augmented and virtual reality. He holds over 400 patents in fields related to imaging, color, video, audio, and networking. He's also a fellow of the Society for Motion Picture and Television Engineers, or SMPTE for short, and he got the AIS Lumiere Award for pioneering HDR in Hollywood. Ajit, thanks for being here today and welcome to the Display Show.
Thank you, Brian. It's always a pleasure to be on any show with you, since you are a display legend yourself.
Well, thanks so much. Hey, let's start with an overview of your current work with Dolby. Please tell us about focus areas for you and your team, and give our viewers some insight into your team's current activities.
All right, yeah. So, I can't tell you exactly what we're working on because I'm always looking at next generation things, and as you'd mentioned, one of the things that I did start on with a small team was Dolby Vision in its early incarnations, right? So now what I'm looking at is, after that was developed and put in good hands, I decided that I needed to start looking at the next horizon, or what we call the third horizon. So I've taken a small team of people and I'm looking at next generation imaging and display technologies, and what video and imaging will look like in the future. Hopefully not too far out in the future, because I'm trying to make sure that's stuff that we can get to in the near future. And AR VR is one of the things that I'm very, very interested in. So maybe can't tell you exactly what we're working on, but that's kind of the general direction.
Well, that's helpful in itself. I want to bring up something that's interesting here. There are still some people who think of Dolby, they still think of Dolby as an audio company. Why did Dolby make this big investment and transition to focus on video and imaging technologies? And I'm also interested, of course, to know how you were a part of it.
All right, so that's that's always an interesting thing, because Dolby's always looked at it as the audio company, and now we're hoping that everybody looks at it as the entertainment and a technology company. That's entertainment technology company, right? So actually, Dolby didn't start in audio. He actually started in video. His first product was actually this VNR device, the video noise reduction for black and white TVs, and that was like way back in 1967. As you know, Ray Dolby started with Ampex in 1956, which was all video focused, right? And So his first product was actually a video product. The problem was it was for black and white TVs, and color was just getting to popularity. So he repurposed that technology and targeted towards audio, and that's kind of where decades of work of audio started, right? And we did have some video interest in 2003, where we bought a company called Cinia, and it was more around video signatures and anti-piracy type solutions. But the real investment in video started in 2007 with the acquisition of Brightside. Dolby had been looking at what's the possible next directions for video, and one of the things that really stuck out like a sore thumb was high dynamic range, right? And specifically some of the local dimming stuff that Brightside was doing. So when we acquired them, it was a small project that just try to get local dimming to the next level and bring that out to the market. So that was actually one of my tasks. Was to work with the newly acquired company and actually bring out some of these solutions. At that time, we had two products. It was ironically called Dolby Vision and Dolby Contrast, right? And so I was put in charge of this Dolby Vision thing that was working with companies like Sim2. I don't know if you remember Sim2, but they were wanting to get this high-end local dimming display out. And what became really apparent very quickly was that this when you do local dimming and you increase the brightness, the 8-bit signal was not going to be enough, right? You immediately started seeing banding, and we were constantly trying to do all these inverse curves to try to make it look better. And today, people call it inverse display mapping, right? But we were trying to do that in some brute force way in hardware that existed back then, and that was really a difficult task. But we were able to drive the display with HDR signals, right? So the issue was not so much that we couldn't drive the picture to make it look good. It was the fact that we didn't have, the world didn't have content that could look good on a display like this, right? So it became obvious that we needed to change the way the world was doing content and the way the world was sending the signal, right? And if you went back to the basics, the gamma curve was based off of the CRTs, and the way the CRT was driving the phosphors in that nonlinear response over there to kind of undo that nonlinear response was the way gamma was bought, but it kind of continued into the LCD world. And so, it became very apparent to us that we needed to fix the whole ecosystem. Interestingly, the first customer that I had to deal with when we were building this Dolby Vision and Dolby Contrast product was car companies who wanted to model their taillights and to make sure that their taillights looked good without having to build the actual taillights. And they needed an accurate HDR. They had HDR rendering capability, but they had no way to look at it on a display. So, so we ended up working with Volkswagen in getting the data out of their pipeline in high dynamic range, but obviously it exceeded anything any display could do back then, and this display was maybe 2,000 nits. So we had to actually manually pre-process the content to display map it down, and then drive it over our non-traditional display interface in a log LUV type format in order to get that display to drive HDR signals, right? And then immediately things started looking good. So taking that to the next level, we're like, well, we want to change the ecosystem. So how are we going to do that? So we actually started shooting content, because cameras weren't the things that had the problem with the dynamic range. It was the display that had the problem with the dynamic range. So we shot content, and then we color graded it. And the color grading had to happen at something that had much higher dynamic range and a much wider color gamut. because everybody was used to, in the cinematic world, was used to P3 color gamut. So it had to exceed P3 color gamut, and it had to exceed anything that anybody else has seen before. So we built this 4,000 nit display, and the challenge of that was insane, because the only way to get wide color was to use RGB LEDs, and RGB LEDs are notoriously inefficient, at least back then. We were talking about like 8% efficiency, and blue was only 12% efficient back then. And so we stacked all these RGB LEDs behind an LCD panel and trying to do local dimming on that. And I remember the first time we turned on the display and cranked it up to get 4,000 nits out of the front. About 10 minutes later, the diffuser literally melted. Like you could see, the diffuser looked like it was a liquid when we pulled it out after it cooled off, right? So obviously, we're like, well, okay, that's not going to work. So we're going to have to cool this thing. So we had already planned for some kind of cooling, and we actually had to use a bucket of ice to pump water through the backlight in order to keep the whole cavity and everything cool, so that it wouldn't melt. And the first image we popped on there at 4,000 nits was this bowl of fruits, and it just popped. Like anybody looking at that picture would realize that we had something, right, immediately. At 4,000 nits, wide color gamut, it was undeniable. Right?
Wow. I've got a question for you. Was Ray Dolby involved in the decision to pursue this field with so much vigor?
Absolutely. Ray was very interested, and he would come to our technical advisory board meetings, and he would always chime in as to like how this was definitely an area of interest. And he actually got to even hear some of my presentations on quantum dots in the early days. So we can get to that in a bit. But definitely, he got to see a lot of this and was very involved in some of the early days.
It's so interesting. You bring up so many points of nostalgia for me. I remember prior to Dolby's Brightside acquisition, seeing the first Brightside demo. It was Helga Seetsen. Set it up in this hotel in Kihung. Actually, we were in Mugum Station. It was near Kihung, and there's fans, and this thing is this giant prototype that they had carted all the way over from North America. But
did he tell you about the fire they started?
No, he didn't tell me about that. Oh my goodness!
One of the displays got on fire. So yeah, he's got his own insane stories on there.
There are so many stories. We knew, though, that this was significant technology from the minute that we looked at it. It had fans, everything was running, but you had to look beyond all that and move beyond the noise, the audio noise, everything else, and just say, wow, this has such great potential. And you also brought up RGB LEDs. So at Samsung, I was involved in those initial ones. Boy, what a bunch of headaches. Not only did they get hot, but trying to keep the white balance correct, because they age at different rates. Oh gosh.
Well, I mean, even with temperature, they color shift like crazy, right? So.
That's right. That's right. Well, so I'll tell you that there's a lot of talk these days about Dolby Vision, and we have to talk about it too. And so to where Dolby is today, now the company is full on in video. And for our viewers who don't know, could you please describe Dolby Vision? I'm sure they've heard of it, but why did Dolby create it? How can users get it? And what are the benefits of this proprietary system?
Yeah, so Dolby Vision, I mean, the best way to describe it is how do you get closer to reality in representing a picture? You need a lot of bright peak highlights and a lot of details in the darks, right? And in order to represent that, you need some kind of a signal to get from the camera to the display. So from glass to glass, basically, right? And that ecosystem is basically Dolby Vision, right? And how do you manage one, the content, how do you transport it, and then how do you play it back on a plethora of different TVs where everybody is innovating in their own direction, right? Samsung's innovating in their direction, LG is innovating in their direction in terms of like better blacks, and then there's Nanosys innovating in color, trying to increase the color gamut. So how are you going to take a signal that was captured one way and make it look right on all the displays and make it look the way the director intended? That's the key, right? So that's what basically we set out to do in Dolby Vision, and that's the reason why it's so important, because in the old days, it was assumed that there was one standard display, the CRT, and it had Rec 709 color gamut and 100 nits, and that was it, right? Your black level was 0.1 nits, and your brightest bright was 100 nits, and
Life was simple, man. Life was simple, but it's not simple
everything was
anymore.
without that. Nobody targeted anything else. I mean, well, cinema was different, but for the home at least, this was it. And so when LCD guys started making displays, and Sony started making wide color gamut displays, what are you going to play on it? I mean, that same signal started to play on these TVs, and things looked just absolutely horrendous because there's no signal. There's no content there that played back the right thing. So everything was being stretched in different ways and it wasn't playing back right. So that's what Dolby Vision set out to do is, okay, you have one signal, but it's got to look right on every device depending on what the color gamut is, on what the dynamic range is. It's got to look right. So that's basically what Dolby Vision is and does today.
Cool. Well, I've got to ask, what's Dolby's future strategy for Dolby Vision?
Well, I mean, of course, you can imagine that displays are never going to go away, and displays are never going to stay stagnant, right? I mean, it's never going to be just the 1,000-nit display we have today with whatever color gamuts we have. We want that to get closest to reality. Until it looks like you're looking through a window, Dolby's job is not done, right? And that doesn't apply just to a 2D surface. We want to take it to everything, right? So the light field display to that immersive experience that you have. Anything that allows the palette for an artist to increase and for stories to be told better, and for it to get closer to reality for that immersiveness, that's basically a part of our strategy, right? And what exactly we're doing in there, of course, well, we can't talk about, but in general, this is kind of the mindset inside of Dolby in terms of where we go.
No, that's very helpful. So given that it's a proprietary system, I have to ask, how important is standardization to Dolby? And can you give us some examples of current areas of standardization activity for your company?
Yeah, so I mean, standards for us is super important because I mean we've always been involved in standards, right? Even with the audio days, right? You have to look at Dolby as doing two things. We do branded IP and non-branded IP, right? So branded IP is where you see Dolby's logo, and the non-branded IP, where we actually contribute a lot to it in the standards, is where you don't see our logo, right? It's part of the standards that you come across that you might not realize that Dolby is part of, but we have a hand in. And one of the key things that we always like to say is you can't build an ecosystem in a closet. So you have to get the industry around ideas, and you have to change it across the board, right? And so that's why standards are super important. That's why standards will always play a role. Even in closed ecosystems, now you're seeing more and more closed ecosystems, standards still play a role in some kind of interchange, right? So between, and the people who are creating content don't necessarily want to be generating content 10 times for every closed ecosystem, right? So standards really play an important role in that sense, right? So Dolby's always going to be involved in that because we look at ourselves kind of as the glue across all of the different pieces that everybody gets involved in across the ecosystem, right? So from Hollywood to device manufacturers, we're always involved in every piece of that puzzle. So standards will continue to be a core thing for Dolby to be involved in.
Yeah, I know a lot of your coworkers are involved in that process. So Pat Griffiths, we met him down at the Ultra High Definition Alliance meetings many times. And of course, I work with Dave Schnelly, who's very active with so many organizations, IEC, ICDM. I could give a laundry list here. But I'm going to go back to Dolby Vision. I have a question about certification. Is there some program for manufacturers to qualify and certify their products?
Yeah, I mean, so typically, I mean, most companies that license from us also get their products, qualified and certified by us as well. So, so we create those types of programs for our customers. So there isn't, it's not so much like like other companies where you just meet a spec and then you get a label. You actually have to have our technology. So we're a technology company, not a certification company, right? So, and we like to bring value in that sense. We want to bring technology value through the ecosystem more than just a label that says, "Hey, this looks good." Now it has our technology and it looks good, right? So that's the way we work. Yeah.
Okay. To the extent that you can describe them, what are Dolby's future priorities for video? And if you can't get into the details, I think our viewers would at least be interested to know Dolby's general directions.
The priority for video is always going to keep being something that's super important for Dolby. And as you know, displays are not going to be stay static in its innovation. They're going to continue to innovate. So 1,000 nit display today sounds like it's obvious and it's standard, but when we first started pitching Dolby Vision and I started talking about 4,000 nit displays, I mean there were people telling me that's garbage, that's impossible. You need a whole power station to power something like that, And then trying to explain to them that only 4% of the screen really needs to go to 4,000 nits. People said nobody would ever, and then of course I showed them Pulsar, and everybody kind of laughed at me and said nobody would ever build a display like this. Why would they ever build something like this, right? It doesn't make any sense. And then we're like, well, maybe somebody would want to build a 1,000 nit display, and I would show them Dolby contrast, and they're like, that would be impossible to build as well, right? So now 1,000 nits is like, I'm not buying a TV unless it's at least 800 to 1,000 nits, right? So you can imagine that displays are going to get way, way brighter, and the implications of that, are manifold, right? And then in addition to that, the types of displays and where you use displays also change. So your use of displays are becoming ubiquitous in every sense of your life, right? So in terms of your cell phone goes with you, you're going to be wearing a pair of glasses. Your TV may not be just the TV on the wall; it might be your whole wall, right? So a lot of those things are going to start happening, and ambient effects start need to be taken into account. So a lot of these things have to start being thought of, and Dolby definitely believes that the future of video has to take care of each one of these things, and we're super interested in the science of the eye and how your eye works and how to present it with information and images that think that it's reality. So that's going to always be our focus and our goal. So yeah.
I'm really glad to hear that, because I'll tell you, displays are definitely getting brighter. The sponsor of these talks, Nanosys, is working on technologies that improve efficiency and enable some of that higher brightness technology. They're also going to get darker, where you can get better detail out of the deep blacks. They're going to become higher resolution in color. They're going to be wider gamut in color. There are so many axes of improvement that are occurring. So it's great that your company is anticipating these improvements and are working on the technologies to support and give a better customer experience through all elements of the pipeline. We could talk more about that. We could spend a lot of time talking about all those improvements, but it kind of gets to the next question, which I had mentioned your colleague Pat Griffiths, and how we would attend these UHDA meetings, and Pat would frequently say, not just more pixels, but better pixels. And that means things like higher contrast and higher dynamic range and wider color gamut, and greater bit depth, and even in the temporal axis, better temporal properties. So I've got to ask, what kind of future display directions would Dolby like to see? And what are the priorities? Which technologies and improvements does your company consider to be the most important?
Yeah, I mean, like Pat likes to say, right? We're not only we love all our pixels, as Pat says. We love our more pixels. we want faster pixels, and we want our better pixels, right? And better pixels is basically dynamic range, right? So for sure, these are axes that we believe are important to images that we're looking at today. But I mean, if you're going forward, you're going to have to start thinking about multiple dimensions, even more dimensions of these axes, right? Which is basically you got to start thinking about field of view. You got to start thinking about resolution. Is what we've got enough? How do you characterize resolution? And then if you start thinking about light field displays, you're talking about accommodation and convergence, and then of course degrees of freedom, and then presenting information with the correct stereo views so that it's comfortable. And then, as you mentioned, there's the standard ones, which are frame rate. In terms of like what is frame rate, right? Is it frame rate of the display, or the frame rate? There's frame rate of the content, and then there's frame rate of the display, and those two things have to be treated differently, right? And how you treat all that is important as well. And then in all of this, latency starts to become super important. And then, we have our more pixels, brighter, better pixels, and faster pixels. So you add all of this together, that defines basically image quality, right? So I call it the 9ins 9 because I'm 9 and I have to have everything with 9. So, so the 9ins 9, you have to have all of these to a certain degree. And there's a minimum amount of quality you have to get to these in order for it to be a comfortable experience. So you have to take into consideration image comfort when it comes to more immersive experiences as well as image quality. So this is basically the area that I think video needs to start branching out into these 9ins 9, right? So. And that's basically what we're looking at as well, right? So there's lots of interesting things. Now that you mentioned Pat, right? I have to go back to one of the stories that in the early days of Pulsar. So we built the Pulsar, and we're taking it around to the studios. We've shown it to JJ and to Michael Bay and all those guys, and then we're doing a demo to Kathleen Kennedy, and we're explaining everything about the display, and we show side by side pictures that have high dynamic range signal going to it, and it's playing back on an SDR screen, a high dynamic range signal playing back on an HDR screen, and Pat turns around to Kathleen and says, "So Kathleen, do you see a difference?" And she turns to him and says, "Pat, you'd have to be a potted palm to not see a difference."
That's great.
Yeah. So internally now we call it the potted palm difference. Like any demo is like, is this the potted palm difference? So,
like if it's obviously better. Yeah.
Exactly. It's got to be the potted palm difference.
Oh, Pat, and the master of the rhetorical question. Exactly. That's great. Well, let me do a deep dive into at least one or two of the 9 and 9. That's color gamut and consistency. So how important is it to improve color gamut and to achieve color consistency and accuracy? And a follow-up question is whether you see a future trend from DCI P3 content toward using a higher percentage of the full BT 2020 gamut.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I mean, of course, we want to get to the full 2020 gamut. If you come to a Dolby Cinema, it is full BT 2020 gamut, right? We use lasers, right? So that was actually one of my projects, is we were trying to build a low-cost mode hopping laser that allowed you to not get speckle on the screen because of the mode hopping laser not allowing you to tune the bandwidth of the laser, and so that way we could actually have have color gamuts that were anything we wanted, like around BT 2020 without speckle and getting all the characteristics of the laser, right? So today we have the same thing with a shaking screen. So does 2020 make a difference? I mean, heck yeah, go to a movie theater and see what an artist can do when he's given more colors. You can tell significantly more vibrant, show more vibrant images, telling stories that you can't tell. So yeah, nature may be inside of Pointer's gamut, but stories aren't told in Pointer's gamut. I mean, nobody walks around with a lightsaber, but we tell stories about lightsabers, right? Which needs really saturated colors. So, do I believe that we need more color gamut? Absolutely. I think 2020 is just the beginning. We need all wavelengths, right? I'll give you an example. People keep thinking about displays as tri-stimulus displays. How are you going to for AR glasses, how are you going to mix a tri-stimulus display to make it look natural in the real world? You get all sorts of issues with three colors mixing and trying to represent something that is an actual wavelength coming to your eye, right? So I believe there's value to color gamut beyond 2020, not even just within 2020, right? So yeah, definitely quantum dots can be one of the solutions there, because the beauty of quantum dots, you can grow this thing to any size and give you any wavelength, right? So we just need a way to do that in a dynamic way that can change color dynamically for whatever picture you want to create in real time. So
yeah, we've done some analysis of movie content, and what we've been able to see, without any question, there are tons and tons of movies that are expressing content well beyond P3 today. And some of the movies aren't even new. 2001, The Matrix. You've got these deep greens. The world is not limited to Pointer's gamut. Maybe that's a gamut of reflected colors outside, but if you look at synthetically generated and CGI type content, there's so much that goes beyond. It sounds like you guys are so interested in that, and you mentioned quantum dots, so I have to ask, in the past, I heard you had some really wild ideas around using quantum dots patterned on a movie screen and pumping them with a laser. So would you like to tell us a little bit about that idea?
That was just a little experiment. We didn't take it too far. I mean, some of the ideas that were, can you make a cinema screen like over 10,000 nits? Well, you could take a laser and scan a laser across a screen, right? Just like literally pointing across. And then the idea is like, oh, what if we took a blue laser and pumped a bunch of quantum dots and patterned it on a screen? So we're like, okay, let's try that. So Jeff gave us some sheets to mess with, and we just tried a scanning laser to see what it would look like. I mean, it was just an experiment. I didn't think it was going to go. But it turns out there's actually a company that does something very similar to that. they don't use quantum dots, but they use phosphors. But I mean, the thing that we knew was going to be a problem was the ambient light lighting up the quantum dots, right? And that's actually, I mean, we have a whole bunch of patents around just the color filter arrays and how do you put quantum dots in color filter arrays, right? And so we wanted to experiment with like, okay, what kind of filters could you put on top of the quantum dots so it would block the light coming from the ambient light and still get all all the light from behind from either a laser or a backlight or whatever it was. So so that helped us like validate some of those ideas that we had filed some patents on and we wanted to actually take to the next level. So I actually do think that some of these ideas, I mean, quantum dots and color filters is happening, and I think that's going to bring brightness levels to the next level, right? So you're going to go from a 1,000 nit display to a 2,000, 4,000 nit display. Pulsar in a phone form factor is not going to be impossible, right? So
Yeah. Well, another hot area, we've got to talk about it. Augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality. There is so much going on in that area. And I hear that you've been doing some work in that area too. And so can you tell us anything about that work?
I can't say too much, but we've been messing around with a couple different experiences, right? What could an interesting entertainment experience look like if you were to have some kind of glasses on? So I can say that, and then of course, from all my talks around the 9 the 9 axes, you should be able to kind of deduce that we are looking at what things could look like in the future for video. We're very, very engaged in anything that's related to perceptual science and image quality and image comfort and anything in entertainment related. So that's basically all I can say. But we're always looking at new things, especially on my team. We were always trying to solve hard problems related to displays, imaging formats, and those types of things like that. So, yeah, computer vision, everything mixed into one. I mean, we're a small team, but at the same time, we try to do touch a lot of topics and feed that to the larger teams to build the next generation experiences, basically.
Well, we're going to continue to watch this space and maybe get bits and pieces of information when you're comfortable talking about it. And I've got a final question, which is important because many of the viewers of these shows are coming from the display industry. And so what other things would Dolby like to see from the display industry? So, if you have any specific hardware or software priorities, this is the right audience, and so please share that with us.
Well, I mean, I think the easy one is to get the brightness and the color gamut to go to the next level, to keep evolving that. And I mean, I would say quantum dots and color filters is the easy next one that we want to see. Then of course, the miniaturization of displays so that they can get near eye. So you can imagine all the micro LEDs and the nano wire LED stuff would be very interesting. So these are all like related to we've been talking about a lot of backlight type displays. So now we're talking about emissive displays where you don't need a backlight, right? So I think those start to become very interesting, and then solving some of those hard problems around being able to direct light to your eye directly, right? So that you can create light field displays or create displays that are much more immersive. So those are the types of things that I think the industry should start looking at. with the obvious first steps, which I said is just getting brightness and color gamut. There's a whole set of things that can happen to displays that need to be thought of differently. Not just from the display point of view. I think people think about displays as like one piece, and I just need to solve this display problem. But to actually start thinking about the whole thing as an end-to-end system, from the point of view of how do I transmit the data and how do I actually put the bits on this display in the right way. If you looked at it as a holistic system, you would actually come up with a completely different architecture. And I have this vision, but I know that it can't happen in a closed, just in Dolby. So it has to happen with everybody across the ecosystem playing together, right? I think that would be an interesting set of things to get the industry to work together on and actually solve, the end-to-end solution for displays. But the real obvious ones are like, hey, let's get these displays higher than 1,000 nits. I mean, we built Pulsar 10 years ago, and nobody is shipping a Pulsar-like display in the home. That's disappointing to me. So that's my first challenge. Go build that 4,000 display that's shipped to the home.
Why stop there? Why not get to the top of the PQ curve and make 10,000 nits?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you got to see our Apollo display that we built, the 10,000 nit quantum dot display. It looks spectacular. It's just whenever I showed that to people were like, "You're crazy. This is never going to be a product." And I'm like, "That's what they said about the 1,000 nits."
Yeah.
10,000 nits is not that unrealistic. So, but I'm making it easy. 4,000 nits. Let's just do 4,000.
You sound like the almond growers. Just a can a day. That's all we ask.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, when you mentioned Jeff, by the way, I think you were talking about our producer here, Jeff Urich, giving you the quantum dots.
So yeah. Jeff has been a key person in our journey with quantum dots with me. So it's like, I don't know if Jeff has ever told you the story, but we were literally pouring quantum dots in our lab before we met Nanosys, right? And we had all sorts of we're not chemists and we didn't know what we were doing, but we had to show some demos, right? And and we were doing just a horrible, messy job. And then I run into Jeff, and Jeff's like, "Yeah, we can do that. That should be pretty easy." I'm like, my new best friend.
That's great. Well, Jeff's right here, and he's cracking up. Hey, I've got a bonus question for you too. That painting behind you, is that the Moulin Rouge?
Which one? The painting?
Yeah.
No, it's just some random painting.
Well, I recognize it. All right. Well, listen, thanks so much, Ajit. I think it's been a great opportunity to talk to you, find out what's been going on at Dolby and where you'd like to see things going. And you've teased us with a little bit of information there. We'll continue to watch for developments on Dolby Vision in the AR, VR area and everything that your company has to offer. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today, and we really appreciate the chance.
Great talking to you, Brian. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.